So I'm going to repot some of these plants that I've just got from dailies. I've got a selection of different size of pots, and I'm going to put these plants in different size pots as we go along. Now, I don't usually use this camera for videos, so I'm not certain if the microphone is any good, so if the volume or the sound comes through in poor quality, very sorry about that. When I pop these plants up, first of all, I have a look at the soil in the pot. Now, I actually mixed the soil up the other day, and it's been sitting in the sun, and as soil does, it tends to get a bit dry. I don't know if that's going to focus for you, but this soil is a little bit dusty on top and a little bit dry, and soils can occasionally become hydrophobic when that happens. And what that means is that you put water on it, and even though you're spraying all the water into the pots, it will flow straight out the bottom, and it won't wet any more than the top few millimeters of soil. Sometimes it'll just kind of spread throughout the soil and go straight out the bottom of the pot without wetting the soil. So beforehand, just going to see how hydrophobic this soil is, if it is at all. So this is one of the pots I'm going to use. All of these have the same soil mix except for this one here. The rest of these I mixed up the other day. I can see already that as we get into the soil, a little bit further down, it is a bit moister than the top layers. It's not wet by any means. And so I'm just going to test to see how well water penetrates this soil at all. I'm just going to spray it down. About that much. And I'm dressed like this because I have an appointment soon, so we'll have to be quick. So I've wet that soil down, and I want to tell, first of all, is it flowing out of the bottom of the pot? Which it isn't yet. And I'm going to dig down, and I can see immediately that this is wet now all the way through. So what this says to me is that when I plant these plants into these pots and I go to water it, they're not going to have any problem getting water to the roots of the plants, and they're not going to die of water even though you water them every single day. So when you transplant a plant to start, you get one from Dailies or wherever it is, Bunnings, some online nursery that you get. The goal should be to cause as little harm to the roots of the plant as possible. So if you've got a cardboard box like this, cutting it off is a good way to go. If you cut it all the way around, you'll be able to pull the box off, exposing the roots without actually damaging them. Get an idea for how deep the plant has to go. And what I like to do is have another pot on standby. This is one that had a tomato in that I just pulled out. And take out from the pot, start spreading it around the edge of the pot for a start so you can dig that hole in the centre. But as you get to about the depth of the base of the plant, and you can check that by getting the plant and sticking it in there, and actually that's about good, so we might not even need another pot at all for this one. It's just if you have too much dirt, soil mix, sometimes you need another pot to put it in. But this one looks like it's going to be fine. So you want to release some of the native soil to the bottom of your hole so that the plant recognises where it's going to live. And you want to put this in the pot. Now you don't want the stem above the soil to be buried by the soil. So if it's dry, when you take it out, so all of this part of the stem needs to still remain above the soil. If you put it in too deep and start covering that soil layer up that's not used to be underground, it can actually start to rot, which is very, very bad. So I'm going to backfill that a little bit just so that it's about at soil level, or even just a touch above, which is there. And then I'm going to backfill it all around using the native soil, using the potting mix like this. Once you've kind of got that plant in the position and it's nice and straight, Give it a good tamping down on all sides so that we know that the pot plant is making contact with the soil. Now in this case, this pot actually needs a little bit more soil to it. So I am going to steal some from this pot here, which is what I was going to plant into in a minute. Making care not to bury lower than the plant, just so it's got that little bit of extra soil. Now that that's done, give it a really good watering in. And in a minute or two, hopefully, we'll start to see some water coming out of the bottom of that pot, which means that the water has penetrated all the way through, nicely wet all the soil, going from there. With this one, this is our, this is the one that's in the Eugenia family, similar to the Rio de Grande cherry. I'm going to pull all of this plastic that's kind of keeping the soil in off the top. We're going to dig our hole. We'll measure for our pot size. It's actually got just a touch too much soil, so I'll put some in this pot as a donor pot. One more. Now with these sorts of pots, you get it by the base. You give it a really good squeeze at the bottom. You can hear the base cracking sometimes as you do it because it's got this plastic webbing down there, like that noise there is the base cracking. Squeeze it up the tube here and gently tip it upside down, squeezing the base, especially around the corners here as you do this. And the whole plant should slip nicely out of the pot without disturbing the roots too much at all. Straight into the new pot. So mix all around it, making sure it's nice and straight, tamping it down. Going back to our donor pot again. Watering it in. You can wear gloves if you want to. I just kind of rinse it off after every go so my hands don't get too black. Now this pot here is approximately 50 litres, 50 to 55 litres. This pot here, approximately 26 litres. This big pot here, this one's about 85 to 90 litres. So this is a big, heavy pot. Especially when you start putting a bit of water in here, this thing is going to get very heavy very quickly. With this type of pot, I reserve them only for trees that are likely to have to live in their pot for a very, very long time. Like this lychee, which will probably never be able to be planted in the ground. Because of that, I'm going to make sure that it gets a good home for a very long time. A very good soil mix, like this one is. I've mixed this soil mix myself, so I know exactly what's in it. It's going to be long-term soil mix. And a pot that's big enough for it to eventually bear fruit in and hopefully live 5 years, 6 years, who knows, 7 years. The longer the better. So just as with the other plants, pots, I'm going to dig a hole big enough to support the whole plant. And some people will say that you shouldn't put a pot this size straight into a pot this size. Some people say that that's actually really, really bad. It can cause problems, like you might be watering the pot, and instead of water getting to the roots of this plant, which takes up a very small proportion of the overall pot, it kind of flows around the outside, or it doesn't get to the roots, and it causes the plant to be water stressed. Some people say that if you put a plant like this into a pot that's too big for it like that, the roots will go straight to the outside and straight down and start circling the pot, or other bad things can happen. I'm not in that camp. I think that when you transplant any sort of plant, that every time you disturb the roots, you give the plant a real shock, which is why we do our best to kind of keep that root ball as intact without disturbing it as much as possible. Especially on tropical plants which aren't deciduous, they don't go dormant in winter. There isn't really a good time where you can mess around with these roots. For instance, a fig tree. You can pull a fig tree out when it's dormant in winter. You can chop the roots right back. You can literally get scissors, root prune that plant. You can't do that with a tropical plant without a lot of trouble. Lots of them have long tap roots, can kill the plant. Lots of them are going to struggle as it is. We're about to go into winter in Canberra. The lychee is a very tropical plant. We don't want to disturb it if we don't want to, if we don't have to. So straight into a big pot is my philosophy. Let it fill that pot out as much as possible. If it does one day start to get root bound, consider what we can do, work out what some solutions might be at that point. But until then, let's just let it be. So just with the other plant, I'm going to massage around the sides of the soil here, particularly focusing on the bottom. Carefully holding the plant so that the native soil falls into the hole, and gently loosen it up like this. Now you see that the roots for this plant have barely been disturbed. Straight into their new home. Pack that soil, mix down around it. There's still a little bit more soil. And as before, water it in. When you wash your hands each time, by the way, if you're potting like this, they're still very clean. I don't need to worry about gloves. You can see, by the way, that there's a lot of water flowing out the base of these plants now. They're dripping from the bottom, which means that the water has nicely gone through. This is one of the plants I showed in my other video, one of the ones that got frostbitten a couple of weeks ago and is most likely a lychee. Well, it's dead. So I'm going to sacrifice it. I'm going to reuse its home for one of our new plants. Because this soil mix has been watered for weeks and weeks, it's actually nice and damp and mixed already, so I'm not going to need to test this at all. I can see that it's nice and damp. Where are the plants? These are these lipstick trees. I'll investigate what they are and report back. Very small pots. These are obviously small seedlings. They're probably just super cheap on dailies, and I thought, why not buy them? I love new plants. Again, squeezing nicely so that we don't disturb the roots of the plants. Straight into the pot. Tamp the soil down. Let's give it a little bit of extra. And that's one. Now we've run out of soil. Be right back in just 1 second with a new pot full. Right, we topped up our soil mix. Last one to do. This is quite an airy soil mix, it wasn't keeping its shape very well then, so I wet it so that I could make that hole a bit easier. And I can see the water flowing straight through, wetting everything, which is really good. Not hydrophobic at all. Straight in the pot. Oh. And that's it, guys. Clean up the mess and we're done. All those plants potted up beautifully. We'll keep on track of them, see how they go over the next few weeks and months into winter, and hopefully we see some excellent results. Thank you very much.